Welcome back, everyone, to the broadcast. Today is episode 4, and we are going to be talking about wisdom today. Hope everyone's doing all right. Hope everyone had a good weekend on this nice, crispy Monday evening, if you will. It's quite a bit cold outside. It's definitely reminded me of autumn more and more. I think I could do with just a little bit more heat if I had any chance, Sometimes we just kind of want that summer feeling to just last just a little bit longer, but we don't always get what we want, so we just kind of have to deal with it, right? This weekend I went hiking, and it was quite a difficult thing. It was like a 4 hour hike, and the first 2 miles, or the first 2 hours of it were basically uphill. And I'd say it was probably at I don't know what the exact degree of verticality was, but it was quite steep to the point where you kind of had to use your hands to go up. It's one of those where it's not just walking. It wasn't just steps as well. It was kind of almost on fours climbing up, and it was quite brutal. My quads are actually super sore today. So I hope everyone's doing all right. I know we're getting into our cast a little bit later than normal, but let's jump right into it. And so basically today's episode is basically on wisdom, right? Now this is something that when I was younger I had quite a bit of difficulty figuring out what it really meant. And I'm still kind of exploring the idea personally and internally on my own understanding of it, right? Wisdom, I think, can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people, and I'm not entirely sure that we've really pinned down what it means, because I think you see a wide range of differences of wisdom, and I'll talk about that in just a second. A wide range of definitions of wisdom, right? And I'll talk about that in a second. But one of the most basic ways that we can kind of look at wisdom is really just to look at the basic definition of it, right? And when you kind of Google it, I guess few definitions come up, and really it's having or showing experience, knowledge, or good judgment, or having knowledge in a specific subject, or responding sensibly or shrewdly to a particular situation, right? And so I thought about this for a little bit, and really to me, wisdom is kind of basically knowing what the outcome of something's going to be, or for lack of a better term, potentially having a higher percentage of understanding what the best option might be. And so I did just a very little bit of research and trying to figure out what might be the best definition and how I specifically feel about it. And I actually stumbled upon an article on Psychology Today, a website that I recommend everyone take a look at. I find it to be just a wealth of information, and it's got some really great stuff on it. But this guy named Paul Baltz, I hope I'm getting the last name right, he is a German developmental psychologist, and apparently he founded the Berlin Wisdom Project and the Max Planck Institute for Human Development. And apparently he's one of the most influential figures in this area. And basically, again, I'm taking this from a Psychology Today article, at least this definition of it. But basically what Paul Baltz's definition of wisdom is, it really has these 5 components to it. And these really resonated with me because I think it was able to conceptualize better an idea and a topic than I've really been able to do myself, right? And so what he says wisdom is right, one of these is 5 of these things together. It's A, rich procedural knowledge about life. B, a rich factual knowledge about life. C, an understanding of lifespan contexts. D, an awareness of the relativism of values and priorities. And E, the ability to recognize and manage uncertainty. So all those 5 things together is what Paul Baltz is saying wisdom is. And I think that really, really, really drives home the crux of what a lot of people are trying to convey of what wisdom is, right? And look, I mean, he couldn't even say it in one line, and he's an expert on this in psychology and wisdom himself, and he had to, break it up into 5 parts. But if we kind of take each of those parts and kind of look at them a little bit separately and more in depth, I think it becomes more apparent why wisdom is so important, why it's something we should all strive for, and why it's something it takes a really long time to get, why you can't just be born and be wise, right? Why it's something that almost comes with age. And this ties back to what I was saying earlier, why it was hard for me to conceptualize it when I was younger, right? You start out life and you kind of go through life and you don't really know anything. And then you learn a little bit. Then you learn a little bit more. And then you learn how to do a few things right. And then you go and tell people, hey, I did this thing right. Look at this. And then someone else says, yeah, that's not the best way to do it. And you're like, well, what do you mean? It's how I was taught. It's the right way. And they're like, yeah, but that's not the best way. So then they tell you how to do it a little bit better. So what? Okay, then you take that knowledge, you build upon it, and then, you see someone else kind of doing something potentially a less efficient way, the original way that you saw, and then you basically tell them, hey, this is what I learned. The best way to do it is this way. And that person goes to you and they're like, well, what do you know? And it's like, well, what do you mean, what do I know? I've done it that way. Well, guess what? They don't actually know that you've done it that way before. They don't know that you've seen anything because they can't put themselves in your perspective. They don't know what you know. And that's really why it's hard to understand when you're younger, because you may know the right way to do something. You may have the best answer, actually, but you may not have the experience that comes with it to understand why it is the best answer, to understand if it even is the best answer, to really understand an idea on the level of, hey, here's all the ways it can go right, here's all the ways it can go wrong, right? So taking a step back from that for 1 second, getting back into Paul Baltz's 5 components of wisdom, the first one he put forward was this rich procedural knowledge about life. And what do we mean by that, right? What I think he means by that is procedural knowledge is basically things that you have to, they're more like boxes you can check off, right? Things that are basic, things that are table stakes when it comes to going through life. How do you tie your shoes? That's pretty basic. You have to know that, right? But when you're first growing up, that's not something you have knowledge of. You learn how to do that, though. Writing, that's another thing. It's procedural. These are things you don't have to think about, that inherently you just know going through life. So in order to have wisdom, you have to have this base of a pyramid, if you're thinking about it like this, of procedural knowledge of how to do things, how to buy things at a store, how does money function, how to provide for yourself, perhaps how to read. This can be distilled down into many different topics, but I think that's what he's really saying by that, because you can't build upon anything to have the wisdom to understand if it's going right if you don't really know what the basic components of how to live life are. And that's important, okay? And so the second piece to that is this rich factual knowledge about life, okay? So let's keep building upon this pyramid, right? So now that we know what the procedural things in life are, tie your shoes, read, write, how to have a conversation, that's procedural. Now we're talking about factual. Okay, well, let's go a step further. What does he mean by factual? Well, perhaps he means having an understanding of things that may not be procedural, that may be more nuanced, that may be more novel to you specifically. Let's talk about what interests me, right? Like, I'm interested in a lot of different subjects. I find a lot of different things fascinating. One of the things that I find fascinating is dietary science. I find astronomy fascinating. I find geology fascinating. I find engineering fascinating. Well, what do I know about any of these things? I find them fascinating, but I don't really know that much about them. I know a little bit about like dietary science. I know a little bit about technology. I find that fascinating as well. So looking at these different categories and things, which ones can we kind of start getting rid of to understand? Okay, maybe I know something about an area, but maybe it's not so factual. Let's take geology. I know about the various forms of rocks, how the plates and tectonic plates move, and how different rocks are transformed into different ways to create new rocks, and how basically glaciers worked, which is part of geology, by the way. And so essentially, yeah, I know enough to have a conversation about it, albeit at a very rudimentary level that's not very good at conveying deep, intensive knowledge onto someone else. But just because I have a rudimentary knowledge of it, I don't really know that many factual things about it, right? So I wouldn't really, at least for myself, consider that a factual knowledge of it. Technology, I'd like to think I know a lot about technology, but every time I learn something new, I find 100 more things that I don't know. But I know enough to be dangerous, right? In a sense that I can have a conversation that's more in depth than talking about forms of rock. I can talk about different technologies. I can talk about how they're used, why they're used, how they're created, what the purpose is they were created for, and how they can be used, taking that a step further, to improve upon their original point and reason why they're created, right? That to me is more of a rich factual knowledge. Okay. Now he says specifically a rich factual knowledge about life, but what is life if it's not, the summation of all the things you know? He could be specifically meaning just a rich factual knowledge about how to live life, but I think it's a bit deeper than that into the things you know. So I think right, procedural knowledge, you got to have that, which is basically how to go through life without needing someone's help, essentially, how to basically survive in society. Then a factual knowledge about life, which is kind of, okay, well, what's the step past that, which is I know some things here and there, and then in some specific areas I have more of an in-depth knowledge and an in-depth understanding of things than perhaps some other people around me, right? The third thing he has is an understanding of lifespan contexts. Okay, well, this is really important, right? Because if you don't understand the end of things, in a sense that, okay, things have a terminal end to them. There is most things in this planet, right? They're not infinite. Okay, there's very few things that are, but understanding when things are necessary to end is super important. So let me use an example here. This is what I think he means by this. If you were a technologist in the dawn of the millennium, when we had the Y2K bug, right? You were right there watching technology's growth expand and double year over year. And it's basically done that up until now, continuously doing that. I forget what the exact principle and law is, but it basically says technology doubles in terms of capability, scale, scope, size, all that thing, year over year. And what we can do, right? Like last year, not last year, but a few years ago, we didn't have touch screens on phones. Now you can't get a phone without a touch screen almost. Okay, that's just a random example. But basically, if you were in that time period in the millennium, right, when you were just kind of being aware of what's going on, we were changing our technology at a pretty fast and rapid pace, right? We were incorporating a lot of new things, and I think that's the important piece to what I'm trying to say is during that period of time, a lot of new technologies were coming. We were starting to just start utilizing the internet, right, for the first time on a larger scale than really had ever been done, because it really hadn't been done up until that point. But the important point was, if you were a technologist, you were seeing the rate of change increase. It's not just the things that are changing, it was the rate of change that was increasing. And that's important because you would have been better prepared for the technology landscape we see today, because you would have already had the experience, right, of seeing this rapid shift of how fast things move, and you might have been ready to consume that and be open to saying, okay, I've already seen things change a lot really quick. Perhaps they can change more, right? And so I think this ties back to the lifespan of things, because being able to say that and say, okay, now that I am aware of how fast things can change, I also have to know how fast things can be created and when the necessary end to a product or an idea would be, right? So example, this is a touchy subject. I'm not going to give my opinion on it yet because I'm kind of undecided on it, right? I don't know what the best answer is. But if you take electric cars, I definitely want one because of the practicality of it. Don't get me wrong, I don't have one yet. But with the rise of electric cars, the question comes up, well, now that we can make electric cars and now that we're starting to learn how to make them cheaper, what is the point of making regular cars anymore? I don't know. I haven't been able to answer that myself. Now, to tie that back to his point, he was saying an understanding of lifespan contexts. Okay, well, is the natural car, the gasoline engine car, is that dead? Have we gone to a point that we have already passed the needle of we're getting diminishing returns on building cars because that's not the future? Perhaps so. Okay, so that's what I think he means by that third step. So again, procedural knowledge, basic, factual, a little bit more nuanced, specific areas of interest to you, and then the third stack to this pyramid is really an understanding of these lifespan contexts. How fast things can be created, how fast things need to die, what is the ability for something to be created within a certain environment, what is the likelihood something's going to die within a certain environment based on various different what's the word I'm looking for? Drawing a blank right now. But basically, influences from different, various contexts to this thing. So when does something live or die, right? And then number 4 is an awareness of relativism of values and priorities. This one is super, super important because you could drive home one of the best solutions, but if it doesn't have a priority to it, if it doesn't relate to the specific value of what you're doing, then it really doesn't matter, right? So what I think he means by this is when you are basically talking about an idea and you want to say, hey, what's the best idea that we can possibly come to the table with? What is the most likelihood of doing the best we can with what we have, right? If you don't create an idea, a product, a form of reasoning, a strategy that takes into context what's most important to yourself and society, then I think you're going to have an inherently bad idea, right? Now, I don't inherently think that he meant this in relation to what's important to society, but I do think that what he's trying to get at is you have to have this awareness of what matters, right? Like if you're creating tires for a car, well, what matters is the road, what matters is how slick the roads get. And you could create, let's say the fastest tire in the world. A lot of the F1 Formula cars, they have these really flat tires, and it's because it helps put the most tread down and provide the most grip. And there's a lot of other components that go into this, but this is, again, my rudimentary knowledge of it. And by putting down more grip, it allows the car to kind of grab the road a little bit better, right? Now, that is perhaps the best tire in the world if it can make a car handle better and go faster. But the question becomes, what is the best tire, like as an example? And it's like, well, that's not considering all conditions. Perhaps it rains a little bit. Then what? Well, actually, those F1 cars have horrible performance in the rain. And it's because they don't have these grooves in them that allow water to kind of cut through and, shoot out the sides and the bottom and the top that it would have if they would have cut the grooves in. So is that then the best tire? I don't know. But that goes back to the question of what is your values and priorities? Are you trying to make the fastest tire? Are you trying to make the best all-round tire? Perhaps neither of those are your priorities. What if you want to do off-roading, right? Well, maybe you need a big beefy tire that has, the capabilities to not puncture, to not break, to not burst. Well, that's another set of criteria. And you could have someone that comes to the table and says, look, I made the best tire. Look how fast it can make cars go, and look at all the handling. And they're like, well, that's not the requirements. We're going off-roading, and that's why it's important. You have to have this awareness of what is important around you. What is the goal you're looking for? Why are you doing something? Okay. And finally, this one's actually kind of important too, when discussing wisdom, is the ability to recognize and manage uncertainty. Well, what is uncertainty? That's not knowing what is correct. And I think this specific piece to it perhaps ties up the previous 4 pillars to Paul Baltz's conceptualization of what wisdom is, right? Because essentially he's saying you have to be able to look and understand and kind of gamble on what may happen or what may not happen. And that, to me, is what I thought wisdom really was. I didn't really consider all these other things, but I really did, after reading it, think about you have to add those pieces into it to be wise, right? It's not just about being wise. It's what makes someone wise. What is really wisdom? And it's those 5 things, right? And if you can't manage and recognize uncertainty, then you're basically just stabbing in the dark with what you do. When someone brings to you an idea or a new way of doing things, and it doesn't always have to be focused on this new way of doing things. It can be simply improving on what's already been done. You have to gauge that new idea or that improvement that you think needs to happen, and basically say, hey, how is this going to impact the future? How is this going to change things when I change things, right? Because it's not only about the change. It's the change that comes from the change. That's the uncertainty. That's what you have to manage. That's what takes a true master. And that's why it's important to have experience. That's why experience is so important for wisdom. Because these people that have a lot of experience in different areas, topics, fields, or just in life in general, they have gone through a lot of different situations, and they've seen things bad and they've seen things do well. And it's the culmination of adding all those different stories that they have inside themselves up together to understand really what is the likelihood of an idea or something new turning out to be good or bad. That's why it's so important to seek out someone who has a lot of wisdom. The way I would conceptualize it really is a story, and I don't remember the specific context of the story, but it's a story I heard really that is about 2 houses that were built. Okay, so one person built their house on this foundation of rock and stone, and another person built a house on a foundation of sand and gravel. Okay. And both these houses were gorgeous, beautiful houses. And really, what happened over time was one of them just kind of fell over, and it was due to, water, floods, earthquakes, rain. I know I said water twice, but you get what I'm saying. Wind. There you go. Tornadoes, whatever. Point is, both these people built really beautiful houses, but only one of them stood over time, and that's because they had the foresight and understanding to know that it's not always just about the house that you build. It's not always about the idea that you create. It's what happens when I create this idea or this new thing. What are the changes that come from it? Okay? And that's really what wisdom is, to me at least. It has to deal with understanding what is important in life, understanding a general idea about how life operates, and understanding the best way to achieve that certain thing. And there's always going to be people out there that have way more wisdom than you. I sure as hell know there's a lot of people that have a lot more wisdom than me. Probably an uncountable number of people. In fact, I know that it's probably true. And it's just something that's really tough to understand when you're younger, because you learn a little bit, and then it's kind of like you try to fight for what you know, and then it's kind of what's the word I'm looking for? It's almost disheartening the first time you think you know something and you tell someone else, and then they shut you down completely, and it turns out to be that you really don't know anything, and it's almost this idea of how small you really are, how much knowledge you actually have. And that's why being old kind of brings forth this idea of wisdom. It's almost impossible to be wise. And it might actually be impossible to be wise unless you're old. And the reason for that is you've just lived longer. You've seen more stuff. You've had more time to think about things than someone who's younger. And that's why it's important, Generally, when I have a big decision to make, when I have a question that I can't answer, I go to someone who's older than me, who's seen this before, who's done this before, who might have a better idea of how to do something. And I try to talk with them and figure out, hey, what would you do if you were in my situation? Do I always listen to them? Heck no. Hell no. In fact, most of the time I still do what I want to do. And a lot of times I'm wrong. Perhaps most of the time I'm wrong. I don't think most of the time I'm wrong, but a good amount of times I'm wrong. But the important part is what they allowed you to see and they showed you is, okay, well, if this is what I want, how would you do it? Well, then they tell you, and it's like, well, here's a potential option of what could happen if you do something a certain way. And if you're thinking about infinity and things like that in life, it's like, well, yeah, there's maybe an infinite number of options of how something could go, an infinite number of opportunities of a certain way that something could fall or something could happen. But it's like, if you know one of them, that's so much more powerful than knowing none of them, right? Because you at least have a potential correct way of doing something. And that's more a lot of times than what you start with. And that's why it's so important. And that's why wisdom is important to me. It's something I hopefully can seek for myself and can learn to grow. If you want to be wise, I think it's important to also be humble. You have to learn how to shut down your own inner want and need to be right all the time and basically take that and say, hey, shut up for a minute. I'm actually going to listen to someone else do this, and perhaps they have a better answer than me. That's been tough for me for my entire life, but, we're going to keep trying to build upon that and see how far we can go with that. I think humility is also another goal, but we'll talk about that in another episode, I suppose. But that's wisdom. That's all it is. That's what Paul Bates thinks it is. And hopefully I didn't butcher his pyramid or his matrix as much as I thought I have. Again, this is just my take on it, and it's something that I'm trying to put out there, and I hope everyone's enjoying it or at least listening in. I'm always open to getting some feedback, good or bad. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are. Again, feel free to let me know in the comments section, subscribe, and if you have any other questions or if you want something that you'd like me to talk about or chat about off the top of my head, I'm more than happy to do that as well. Just feel free to reach out on the Brocast. Thanks for joining. Thanks for listening, everyone, and I will catch you guys later. Bye.